Someone who goes bankrupt once will go bankrupt again. That's a rich thing to hear from a Trump supporter. What should the tax rate be? I don't know. It should be higher than it is now. I don't care about the tax rate. I care about funding the programs that I want in order to fix the material issues that we have in the country. So the tax rate should be whatever it needs to be in order to fund those programs. And that will actually allow us to raise the revenues that will create those programs and not necessarily like totally kill capital investment. Which, you know, I think there is plenty of room. There's plenty of room for taxation in this country. So you think the corporate media sensationalize stories for ratings and business and that they're not ideologically driven? No, they're not ideologically driven. You 100% would consider Anthony Weiner to be a leftist if you know who Anthony Weiner is. And if you saw how unbelievably relentless they were about the Anthony Weiner coverage, you would not believe that the corporate media is ideologically driven. They're driven by ratings. They are ideologically biased because the corporate media tends to be filled by certain kinds of people who hold certain kinds of views, and that colors the way in which they report on issues. But generally, that tends to work out worse in terms of like epistemically sound views to hold. That works out worse for the left than it does for the right, because the right doesn't have any epistemically sound views. The criticism of that idea is that government programs inevitably grow into bloated, inefficient bureaucracies and wind up becoming more wasteful than beneficial. That is a problem with our political process, and it's also, honestly, it's not even a valid criticism of the programs, because a lot of the reason these programs become wasteful rather than beneficial is because of systematic defunding by Republicans in Congress. This is what we're seeing with Social Security, is that what Republicans and what the right will do is they will defund a program saying like, listen, like we don't have, so here's like the step-by-step process. Take something like Social Security. Let's say Social Security. No, let's take the USPS actually. So it's about 2005. And Republicans are basically saying the USPS has way too much money. And that's a bad example because the USPS, there wasn't even that pretext. It was clearly a war waged. For the USPS in 2006, basically, Republicans and Democrats both passed a bill forcing the USPS to pre-fund healthcare and retirement benefits for 100% of all employees who would be working there over the next 50 years, which is a ridiculous. No other government agency has to do that. On top of which, the USPS is entirely revenue funded. It is not, or rather, entirely operations funded. It gets absolutely zero revenue from taxation or it gets no funding from government revenue. So it was specifically a bill designed to eviscerate the USPS. And then what you do is you wait for the USPS to die, slowly become less effective because it's bogged down by administrative and operating costs, and this intense like deductible on all of its operating costs that you have to pre-fund for 50 years all of the retirement funds and healthcare costs of your workers. And because of that, the USPS becomes ineffective. And then what Republicans turn around and say, look how ineffective the USPS is, we need to privatize it. They did the same thing to Social Security and generally entitlements. That entitlement reform is a Trojan horse in which you basically say, we need to cut entitlements to save money because, you know, we're in a down economy or we're in an up economy, and we need to we're in an up economy, and you know, for any number of reasons you can create any pretext, and you say we need to cut food stamps, we need to cut Medicaid because we don't have the level of poverty that we did before, so people don't need it as much, which means we should put less money into it. And then you cut those programs so that when their need arises, they become extremely ineffective. And then you say, look, this program is really ineffective, not omitting the fact that you're the one who defunded it 20 years ago. And because you've defunded those programs, they, you know, contribute to the deficit, they're poorly funded. And then you say, we need to privatize those programs or abolish those programs. The turning of social programs into wasteful, terrible things, like there have been individual cases of programs that turned out to be bad programs. What you do is you create better versions of those programs. But what Republicans do is they take those programs and they turn them into case study examples as the only example of a social program that was wasteful by definition, rather than one that was made wasteful by Republican defunding campaigns. And then they use those as poster children for saying, like, see, government doesn't work. Actually, it's a lack of government funding that has caused these programs not to work. The OS owes $20 trillion and climbing. That's like a totally different question. All of the programs that I'm proposing are paid for through taxation. All of the programs. We don't come close to paying for our programs. Yes, those are different programs, and our military budget is a huge portion of that deficit. In fact, it holds an absolute plurality on the deficit. So if you really want to tackle national debt, you should look at our military spending. But yes, I think we should pay for our programs, and part of it is that our tax rates can be much higher than they are now. Taxpayers owe $20 trillion. Taxpayers owe a lot more than that when you consider medical debt, when you consider student debt. You think that those amounts of debt don't exist just because they're not part of the deficit? Taxpayers owe a lot more than $20 trillion, and it's because of a lack of government intervention. The national debt might be higher. It might be higher. Most of these programs are paid for. All of Biden's programs are paid for. Yes, military should be cut as well. So military should be cut. But if we cut healthcare programs, where do you think that debt is going? We're not going to lose that debt. The government won't owe that money, but the people will, because they're going to start incurring medical debt. They're going to start incurring more medical debt than they are right now. They're going to start incurring more student debt than they are right now. And government intervention through social programs is going to overall reduce the debt burden on the taxpayer. It might increase the national debt, but by droves, it will decrease the individual taxpayer's debt in their regular life, their medical bills, their hospital bills, their student loans. And that's also really important, because it is the job of the U.S. government to represent its people when they're being treated unjustly. Making $20,000 a year and having a $400,000 bill on a heart transplant that wasn't totally covered, that is an injustice. Government debt equals taxpayer debt? No. Taxpayer debt is government debt plus individual debt. Plus individual debt. Taxpayers have more debt than the government right now. How many genders are there? It depends. In India, there are 3 genders legally. Gender is a human derived construct. So, unfortunately, there is actually no consistent measure of how many genders there are, because there's, even within the realm of scientific realism, where we can say that biological sex is a quote-unquote real thing, that gender itself is a human constructed concept of measuring certain traits that tend to correlate based on sex. So that's an impossible question to answer super honestly, because it varies geographically, and the reason for that is that gender is a human made up thing. So, I mean, you can laugh all you want. Like, the American Psychological Association backs up everything I have to say, and literally most medical authorities also back up what I have to say. You're living in the 1900s as far as gender goes, if you think that that's not true. In fact, you're not even living in the 1900s, because even in the 1900s, countries had third genders. There were third genders. There is a third gender in India. There has always been a third gender in India. I'm not interested in your cute pseudoscience. I mean, if you want to call it pseudoscience while it's backed up by literally every authority on every field in which I'm talking right now, like the Psychological Association acknowledges that gender is a social construct, which is why gender identity is a real thing. Most medical authorities that I know of acknowledge that gender and sex are completely different concepts. So, would have been good in a war zone. Well, okay, listen, I can't be bothered to connect my controller, so we're going to Franklin. So, saying you're not interested in my cute pseudoscience, you're saying you're not interested in what every medical and psychological authority has to say about gender, at which point you're the one who's arguing against science, my friend. I'm sorry. Which gender are you? I identify mostly with male traits. My pronouns are they and them. I have no realistic expectation that you're going to use those pronouns, but I would much prefer it if you did, simply because you should respect what individual people want to be called. I go by they, them pronouns. I do identify as a member of the non-binary community, but largely I am privileged in terms of, like, I have most of the privileges of a cisgender man, and I identify mostly with the traits of a cisgender man. But there are like male gender norms that I don't identify with, which is part of why my pronouns are they, them. But like, you can call me man, you can call me dude, you can refer to me as Mr. Though, well, you've already set quite aggressive tone and even used personal insults. So why would you expect me to be respectful enough to use particular pronouns? Because I haven't insulted you based on an aspect of your social identity. But you've also insulted me personally. You called me a bunch of things. But so some insults are okay, others are not. Yeah, no, that's always been my policy. Listen, I'm not a snowflake who thinks you should never, ever, ever. I think you should avoid being mean to people generally. And you know, if I hurt your feelings with those insults, I do apologize. I definitely I don't want to be hurtful. I like to be as compassionate as I can, but the truth is that you've been pretty insulting in our conversation, and I felt fairly. You've been insulting and also just generally unreceptive to reasonable arguments to the contrary of what you believed. So I've been a little bit more aggressive than I like to be, and but at the same time, it's just like, you know, sometimes it's just too funny not to be. But yeah, definitely some insults are okay and others are not. Insults based on a person's social identity is like inherently like you're insulting someone based on things that they absolutely can't control. Your level of compassion that you choose to show people in your day-to-day life is much more within your control than, say, whether or not you're white or black, or how much your individual identity lines up with the gender you were assigned. That has a lot to do with psychological traits that you don't control, has a lot to do with aspects of your personality that you don't control, aspects of your sex determination that you don't control, and that there are definitely multiple aspects. So, for example, like, I would never use terms to refer to you that today are routinely used to refer to people with developmental disabilities, right? There's a lot of people on the internet, I'm lowering my voice because there's kids in the house. There's a lot of people on the internet who will use the term like autistic or retarded as an insult, and I would never do that, because those are actively used, A, to refer to developmental disabilities, and B, to insult and dehumanize people based on developmental disabilities. So I would never use those terms for you. But personally, I'm okay with using a term like stupid. There is a legitimate argument that potentially the term stupid is in itself problematic. And if it turns out that's the case, I welcome the argument that justifies that. I haven't personally heard it to a satisfying degree. But, the next generation might consider me abhorrent because I use stupid as an insult, and I totally welcome that. I just haven't seen that argument presented. Same with words like crazy. That crazy might be insulting someone based on mental illness, but I'm not satisfied by that argument either, so... So yes, I got into an insult match with somebody. It was very, very vitriolic, very angry, very aggressive, and they still respected my pronouns. And it was, it felt really good that you're not willing to cross the line into, trafficking in bigotry against someone. Of course, you wouldn't agree that misgendering someone is bigotry, but it absolutely is. Facts don't care about your feelings. But, we can, we can disagree on that, but it's unfortunate that you consider the consensus of scientific communities to be pseudoscience. It's almost definitionally not so. It's not surprising to me that someone who someone who considers Project Veritas to be reputable reporting thinks that scientific community consensus is pseudoscience. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more content, the best way you can support the channel is to click that like button and subscribe for future videos. I will be covering all sorts of topics. The election, I'll be talking about Biden, the Democratic Party, the global right, healthcare, all sorts of stuff. And if you'd like to join the discussion live, I stream live to Twitch weekdays, typically 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Otherwise, stay tuned for more videos out regularly. Have a great day. Thank you.